In the glittering maze of skyscrapers and boardroom battles, where ambition is currency and emotions are locked away like secrets in a vault, there's a story that defies every rule. Imagine a world where the person you're drawn to isn't just out of reach. They're the one who signs your paycheck.
Where every glance could be a risk, every laugh might be misinterpreted, and the line between duty and desire blurs into a dangerous dance. This isn't just a tale of office politics or stolen moments between spreadsheets and strategy meetings.
It's about the quiet revolution that happens when someone sees you. Not just your title, not just your performance reviews, but the real you, hidden beneath the suits and the smiles. What if the coldest heart in the company wasn't so unfeeling after all? What if the assistant who stayed late, who picked up the pieces everyone else dropped, who laughed at the bad coffee and worse jokes, started to see beyond the icy exterior? What if the man who built walls taller than the Empire State Building began to crack, just a little, under the weight of a gaze that wasn't afraid to linger? This is a story about the moment everything changed, the moment she defended him when no one else would, the business trip that forced them into conversations they'd never had before, the rainstorm that delayed a flight but accelerated something far more powerful. It's about the way vulnerability can sneak in when you least expect it, how a laugh can become a lifeline, and how two people who promised themselves they'd never let anyone in again find themselves knocking on doors they never knew existed. So, if you've ever wondered what happens when professional boundaries shatter, when the cold boss meets his match in the one person who refuses to see him as just a title, buckle up, because this isn't just a romance. It's a rebellion against the rules, a gamble with hearts, and a reminder that sometimes the most unexpected love stories are the ones that change everything. Ellie Gordon smoothed the front of her blazer one last time before stepping into the sleek, modern lobby of Robinson Enterprises. The marble floors gleamed under the overhead lights, and the air carried the faint scent of freshly brewed coffee. She was here for her first day, as Matt Robinson's executive assistant, a position she'd worked tirelessly to secure. She'd heard all about Matt, the brilliant strategist, the ruthless negotiator, the man who built a multi-million-dollar empire from the ground up. What she wasn't prepared for was how completely dismissive he would be. "Ms. Gordon, I assume?" Matt's voice cut through her thoughts as she stood hesitantly outside his office door. He didn't look up from the stack of documents on his desk, his fingers flying across the keyboard of his laptop. "Yes, Mr. Robinson," she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "Ready to begin?" Matt finally glanced up, his piercing blue, eyes scanning her from head to toe. "The board meeting is in 15 minutes. I need you to have all the presentations prepared and in the conference room before I get there." He turned back to his laptop without another word, leaving Ellie standing there, feeling as though she'd already failed some unspoken test. Throughout that first day, the pattern repeated itself. Matt barked orders, Ellie scrambled to comply. "Coffee, black, 2 sugars," he'd say without looking up. "Draft a memo to the sales team about the third quarter projections. Reschedule my 3 o'clock with Johnson. I'm not in the mood for his incompetence today." There was never a please or a thank you, just directives delivered with the cold efficiency of a man who demanded absolute perfection. By mid-afternoon, Ellie's feet ached and her stress levels were through the roof. She caught glimpses of Matt throughout the day, the way his brow furrowed when reviewing financial statements, the sharp angles of his jaw as he listened to a presentation. But he never truly saw her. Not as a person, anyway. To him, she was just another cog in the well-oiled machine of his corporation. When the office began to empty at the end of the day, Ellie stayed late, as she knew she'd have to. She organized Matt's desk, filed the mountains of paperwork he'd left in his wake, and even took the time to arrange the books on his shelves alphabetically. As she was packing up her things, she noticed a small framed photograph tucked away on the farthest shelf. A woman with dark hair and a warm smile, her arm linked through Matt's. The edges of the frame were slightly worn, and Ellie wondered briefly who she was before forcing herself to look away. That first day set the tone for the weeks that followed. Matt continued his pattern of barely acknowledging Ellie's existence, beyond what was necessary to keep his professional life running smoothly. He never commented on the extra miles she went to ensure his schedule was perfectly optimized, never noticed when she stayed late to handle the overflow of work he generated. To him, she was just his assistant, invisible, reliable, and completely taken for granted. Still, Ellie persisted. She knew that in order to succeed in this role, she needed to prove herself not just as an employee, but as an indispensable part of Matt's professional life. Little did she know that fate had other plans. Plans that would eventually force Matt to see her in a way he never thought possible. Matt Robinson was a legend in the business world, and Ellie had known exactly what she was walking into when she accepted the position as his executive assistant. But knowing about his reputation and experiencing it firsthand were two entirely different things. His mind was a razor-sharp instrument, capable of dissecting complex financial reports and market strategies with ease. Genius and cruelty often go hand in hand, Ellie muttered to herself one afternoon as she watched him dismantle a competitor's proposal during a video conference, his eyes never leaving the screen. The office buzzed with whispers about Matt's private life, or rather, the lack thereof. "He's completely unavailable," Laura from accounting had confided during a coffee break, her voice hushed as if Matt might overhear. "Fully dedicated to the company. Rumor has it, he hasn't been on a date in 5 years." Ellie had nodded politely, but the words had struck a chord. She couldn't help but wonder about the man behind the legend, the one who stayed late every night, his office light, burning long after everyone else had gone home. Ellie had quickly learned to navigate the unspoken rules of working for Matt. His coffee had to be exactly 3 shades darker than caramel, his emails responded to within 15 minutes, and his schedule organized with military precision. Yet, despite her best efforts, Matt remained an enigma. Just his assistant, at first. Ellie would remind herself on the days when his indifference stung a little too deeply. One afternoon, as Ellie was updating Matt's calendar, she overheard a conversation between 2 board members in the elevator. "That Robinson's heart is off limits," one of them had said, her tone knowing. "He's built walls taller than the Empire State Building around himself." Ellie had laughed it off, but the words lingered. What kind of man builds walls that high? And more importantly, why? The answer came on a rainy Tuesday when Matt had called her into his office. "I need you to handle the arrangements for the merger negotiations in London," he'd said, his voice as impersonal as ever. "Flights, hotels, meeting schedules, everything." Ellie had nodded, her mind already racing through the logistics. As she turned to leave, Matt had added, almost as an afterthought, "And Gordon?" "Yes, Mr. Robinson," she'd replied, her heart skipping a beat at the rare use of her last name. "Don't disappoint me." The weight of those words had followed her through the rest of the day, a mixture of pressure and something else she wasn't quite ready to acknowledge. As the weeks turned into months, Ellie Gordon became the silent backbone of Matt Robinson's professional life. While others clocked out at 5, she stayed behind, her desk lamp casting a warm glow over spreadsheets and reports that needed her attention. She didn't mind the extra hours. In fact, she found a strange comfort in the quiet of the empty office. It was her sanctuary, a place where she could prove her worth without the pressure of Matt's piercing gaze upon her. One evening, as Ellie was updating the quarterly financial projections, she noticed a pile of unopened mail on Matt's desk. "Probably important," she muttered to herself, her curiosity piqued. Carefully, she sorted through the envelopes, her fingers brushing against a handwritten note that had slipped beneath a stack of invoices. From his ex-wife? She wondered, the elegant script unfamiliar but undeniably feminine. She quickly tucked the note back into its hiding place, her cheeks flushing with guilt. It wasn't her place to pry into Matt's personal life, no matter how tempting the mystery. The loyalty Ellie showed went beyond the call of duty. When the marketing team dropped the ball on a crucial campaign deadline, she quietly took charge, coordinating with designers and copywriters late into the night. Matt noticed the finished work on his desk the next morning, but offered only a curt nod of approval. Professional boundaries broken by fate, Ellie thought with a wry smile, though she doubted fate had anything to do with her thankless efforts. Her invisibility was both a blessing and a curse. Matt would often find her at her desk during late nights, her presence as constant as the hum of the office refrigerator. "Still here?" he'd ask, his voice devoid of concern. "Someone's got to clean up your mess," she'd reply, the bitterness tempered by a loyalty she couldn't quite explain. She was just his assistant at first, but the line between professional duty and personal investment was growing blurry, and neither of them seemed to notice. On a particularly stressful Friday, Ellie found herself fielding calls from furious clients while Matt was tied up in a boardroom showdown. She handled each complaint with grace, her calm demeanor a stark contrast to the chaos around her. When Matt finally emerged hours later, he found her asleep at her desk, head resting on a stack of files. A strange sensation tugged at his chest as he watched her. Something like gratitude, but he quickly pushed it aside. After all, she was just doing her job, or so he told himself. The pattern became frustratingly familiar to Ellie. Matt's communication with her was reduced to a series of commands delivered with all the warmth of a robotic voice assistant. "Prepare the conference room for the 9 a.m. meeting," he'd say as he breezed past her desk, not waiting for a response. "Draft a response to the Johnson account. Express our disappointment in their latest proposal," he'd add, already moving on to his next task. Ellie found herself constantly questioning whether she was meeting his expectations. Was the report detailed enough? Was the coffee brewed to the exact temperature he preferred? She poured her heart into every task, hoping for some acknowledgement, however small. But Matt's world was one of results, not sentiments. "If you're waiting for a thank you, you're in the wrong place," he'd say if she dared to mention the extra hours she'd put in. His words stung, but they also fueled her determination. She wasn't just going to be good at her job, she was going to be indispensable. There were moments when Ellie caught Matt watching her from the corner of his eye, his expression inscrutable. She wondered if he was considering how much he relied on her, how his days would be chaotic without her quiet efficiency. But then, he'd turn back to his work, and the moment would pass, leaving her to wonder if she'd imagined it. During a particularly busy week, Ellie pulled 3 all-nighters to prepare for a major client presentation. She arranged every detail, from the slideshow to the catering, and even rehearsed Matt's talking points in case he needed a last-minute refresher. The presentation went flawlessly, and the client signed the contract on the spot. Matt shook, their hand with a smile that never reached his eyes, then turned to Ellie and said, "Get the legal team on this immediately. We need the paperwork finalized by tomorrow." "No, thank you." No acknowledgement of her sleepless nights or the stress lines forming under her eyes. Just another directive. But Ellie wasn't ready to give up. She knew that behind those cold directives, there was a man who, deep down, recognized her value, even if he wasn't ready to admit it. The turning point came during a high-stakes meeting with a potential investor. The conference room was tense, the air thick with the unspoken threats of a possible partnership falling through. The investor, a sharp-tongued woman with a reputation for tearing apart unprepared executives, was grilling Matt on the projected returns of a new venture. "You're expecting us to invest millions based on these numbers?" she snapped, slapping a folder onto the table. "Do you take us for fools, Mr. Robinson?" Matt's jaw tightened, his fingers drumming against the table in a rare show of nerves. Before he could respond, Ellie's voice cut through the tension, steady and confident. "Actually, if you look at the data from the past 3 quarters, you'll see a consistent upward trajectory that wasn't fully captured in the initial report," she said, sliding a revised document across the table. "We've also secured partnerships that will significantly reduce operational costs. Details that will be in the updated presentation I'll be sending to your team by end of day. The room fell silent. Matt's eyes widened imperceptibly as he glanced at Ellie, who stood her ground, her posture as straight as her logic. The investor leaned back, clearly impressed. "Well, this changes things," she admitted, her earlier hostility softening. "Carry on." After the meeting, Matt found Ellie at her desk, quietly organizing the follow-up tasks. "You overstepped," he said, his tone a mix of irritation and something else, something almost like admiration. "I did what needed to be done," she replied, her voice firm but not defiant. "The presentation had gaps and you know it. If we want this investment, we need to be transparent and prepared." Matt stared at her for a long moment, his blue eyes searching hers. Then, without another word, he turned and walked away, leaving Ellie with a faint smile playing on her lips. For the first time, she felt seen, not just as his assistant, but as someone who understood the game just as well as he did. The next day, Matt arrived at the office earlier than usual. He found Ellie already at her desk, reviewing the revised presentation she'd promised. Without looking up, he said, "The investor called. They want to move forward." Then, almost as an afterthought, he added, "Good work." The words were simple, but they carried weight. A small acknowledgement that marked the beginning of a shift neither of them had anticipated. The business trip to Chicago was announced with Matt's usual brevity. "Gordon, you're coming with me. Flight's at 7 tomorrow. Pack light," he said, dropping an itinerary on her desk. Ellie barely had time to process the news before he was out the door. The trip itself was a blur of meetings, negotiations, and the constant hum of Matt's strategic mind at work. But it was the evenings that changed everything. On the first night, after a particularly grueling meeting, Matt found Ellie in the hotel bar, nursing a glass of white wine. "Surprised to see you here," he said, sliding into the seat beside her. "I figured you'd be reviewing documents or something." Ellie shrugged. "Even assistants need a drink sometimes." A rare smile tugged at Matt's lips. Touché. They talked, really talked, for the first time that night. Ellie learned that Matt had grown up in a small town outside Boston, the son of a single mother who worked 3 jobs to put him through college. "I never had time for distractions," he said, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. Not when there was so much to prove. Ellie shared stories of her own upbringing, of parents who valued education above all else, and the scholarship that had brought her to the city. The conversation flowed effortlessly, the earlier directives and cold shoulders forgotten for a few precious hours. Back at the hotel, the proximity of their adjoining rooms became a focal point neither could ignore. Late-night discussions spilled into shared laughter over room service, then into heartfelt conversations about dreams and regrets. "You're nothing like the people I thought you surrounded yourself with," Ellie said one night, her guard lowered by exhaustion and connection. Matt's response was quiet, but revealing. "People see what I let them see. You see more." The admission hung between them, a thread of vulnerability in the otherwise impenetrable armor he wore. The trip that had begun as just another work obligation became the catalyst for a new dynamic. Matt found himself seeking out Ellie's company. During breaks, his questions about her opinions on strategies and decisions growing more frequent. Ellie, in turn, began to see glimpses of the man beneath the title, the one who quoted poetry when he thought no one was listening, and who kept a well-thumbed copy of Pride and Prejudice in his suitcase. The professional boundaries that had once been so clear were now blurred by late-night talks and shared moments of humanity. The walls began to crumble in the second week of the trip. One evening, after a particularly heated negotiation that left both of them drained, Matt met Ellie in the hotel lobby. His tie was loosened, the top button of his shirt undone, a rare display of dishevelment. "Coffee?" he asked, his voice rough with fatigue. Ellie nodded, and they walked in silence to a small cafe a few blocks away. As they sat across from each other, the usual office pretenses fell away. Matt's eyes, usually so sharp and unreadable, held a vulnerability that took Ellie's breath away. "I never told anyone this," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. "But the company wasn't always mine. I built it from debt, from nothing. There were days I couldn't pay the bills, days I considered just walking away." Ellie listened, her heart aching with a new understanding. He spoke of his mother's illness, the medical bills that had driven him to take risks he'd once deemed reckless. "I had to succeed," he said, his gaze distant. "Failure wasn't just about me, it was about her." Ellie reached across the table, her fingers brushing his in a gesture that was both comfort and connection. For a moment, time stood still. Back at the hotel, the dynamic between them shifted. Matt no longer hid behind his carefully constructed mask of indifference. Late at night, they'd sit in the dimly lit hallway between their adjoining rooms, sharing stories that had nothing to do with boardrooms or profit margins. Ellie learned that Matt had once dreamed of being a writer, that he still kept a journal hidden beneath his desk, and that he could recite entire passages of the great Gatsby from memory. One night, as they talked about their shared love of literature, Ellie laughed at a story Matt told about his college days. "You're nothing like the cold boss everyone talks about," she said, her voice warm with genuine affection. Matt's response was quiet, but profound. "With most people, I have to be. With you, I don't." The realization hung in the air, unspoken but impossible to ignore. The professional boundaries that had once seemed so absolute were now little more than whispers of their former selves. And in that vulnerability, Ellie saw not just the boss, but the man, a man who, for the first time, allowed himself to be truly seen. It was during one of those late-night conversations in the hotel hallway that Matt finally noticed Ellie's laugh. It was a warm, melodic sound that had the power to transform the atmosphere around them. It was a sound he realized he had never truly heard before, despite working alongside her for months. As she recounted a childhood memory of her and her siblings getting into mischief, her laughter bubbled out, genuine and unreserved. Matt found himself captivated, not just by the sound, but by the way her eyes sparkled and the way her shoulders shook with mirth. It was a side of her that had been hidden beneath the professionalism of the office, and he was struck by how much he had missed. "Your laugh is contagious," he said, his voice gentle. Ellie's cheeks flushed, and she quickly composed herself. "Sorry, I didn't mean to get carried away." Matt shook his head. "Don't apologize. It's refreshing." The moment stretched between them, charged with an unspoken connection. Back in the office after the trip, Matt found himself subconsciously seeking out moments that would make Ellie laugh. He would share a humorous article he came across, or forward a light-hearted email from a colleague. Each time she laughed, he felt a strange sense of fulfillment, as if a part of her he had never accessed before was now within reach. During a break in a particularly intense project, Matt surprised Ellie by bringing in pastries from her favorite bakery. As they sat in the break room, Ellie's laughter filled the space as she shared a funny anecdote about a mishap during her college days. Matt watched her, truly seeing her in that moment, not just as his assistant, but as a person with depth, humor, and a vibrancy he had somehow overlooked. "What's so amusing?" he asked, feigning offense. Ellie looked up, her eyes bright. "You, Mr. Robinson. Who knew the cold boss had a soft side?" Matt's response was a rare, genuine smile. "Don't tell anyone. My reputation is at stake." The laughter continued, weaving an invisible thread between them that neither wanted to break. As the days went on, Matt found himself increasingly drawn to these moments of levity. He realized that in focusing so intently on his professional image, he had unintentionally shut out the very thing that made life worth living: the connection, the joy, the simple pleasure of a shared laugh. And in noticing Ellie's laugh, he began to see her in a new light, one that made it impossible to go back to the way things had been. The return flight from Chicago was delayed by a relentless rainstorm that drummed against the airport windows, like a nervous heartbeat. Stranded for hours, Matt and Ellie found themselves wandering the terminal, searching for a quiet place to wait out the weather. The chaos of the storm outside mirrored the subtle turbulence in their relationship, a turbulence neither seemed eager to address. They ended up in a small, dimly lit cafe tucked away in a corner of the terminal. The air was thick with the aroma of freshly brewed coffee and the soft buzz of conversations. Matt slid into a booth by the window, and Ellie followed, her heels clicking softly against the tiled floor. For a moment, they sat in silence, the weight of the day's events hanging between them. "I didn't think you'd ever notice," Ellie said finally, her voice low. Matt raised an eyebrow. "Notice what?" She smiled, a hint of mischief in her eyes. "My laugh. You've been trying to make me laugh all week." Matt leaned back, a rare smile playing on his lips. "Is it working?" Ellie nodded. "Yes, surprisingly well." The conversation flowed more easily than either had anticipated. They talked about everything and nothing: the storm outside, the quirks of frequent business travel, the books they'd read as children. Matt discovered that Ellie had a passion for astronomy, a fact she'd never mentioned in the office. "I used to stargaze with my dad," she said, her voice tinged with nostalgia. "He taught me all the constellations." Matt found himself entranced by the way her eyes lit up as she spoke. As the hours passed and the storm showed no signs of letting up, the cafe grew quieter. The two of them remained in their booth, the world outside fading into a backdrop of rain and wind. Somewhere between sharing stories of their pasts and laughing over a shared packet of sugar, the line between professional courtesy and personal connection blurred beyond recognition. When the cafe announced it was closing for the night, they found themselves reluctantly stepping back into the terminal. The flight was still delayed, and the airport was nearly deserted. They walked side by side, the distance between them shrinking with each step. By the time they reached the gate, the unspoken tension between them was almost tangible. Neither spoke of it, but both knew that the rainstorm had done more than delay their flight. It had opened a door to a connection they'd been too busy, too afraid, or too proud to acknowledge before. And as they waited for the weather to clear, they found themselves wondering what would happen when it finally did. The unexpected dinner at the airport cafe turned into an evening neither could have anticipated. As the rain continued to pour outside, Matt found himself sharing a piece of his past he had never intended to reveal. "There was someone," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. "Before the company, before all this." Ellie listened, intently, sensing the gravity of the moment. Her heart ached as Matt spoke of a college love affair that had ended in tragedy, a relationship cut short by a car accident that claimed her life. "I built walls after that," he admitted, his gaze fixed on the rain-streaked window. "I couldn't bear to let anyone in again, not when it hurt so much to lose her." Ellie reached across the small table, her fingers gently covering his. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice filled with empathy. Matt had never spoken of this to anyone. Not to colleagues, not to friends, certainly not to someone like Ellie, who had once been just his assistant. But in the confines of the storm-lit cafe, with the world outside seemingly paused, he found himself pouring out his soul. "I didn't realize how much I'd closed myself off until I met you," he said, his voice catching. You made me see that it's possible to let someone in again." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Ellie's mind raced. Was this the moment she'd been waiting for? Was this the breakthrough that would change everything? She didn't have to wait long for an answer. As the first flight announcements began to crackle over the speakers, signaling the storm's end, Matt turned to her, his eyes searching hers. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for listening, for understanding." Ellie smiled, her heart swelling. "I'm here," she replied. Always. The flight home was no longer just a return journey. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one where the walls Matt had spent years building were finally starting to crumble, and where Ellie had become more than just an assistant. She had become his confidant, his support, and perhaps even his hope for a future that included more than just professional success. The change in Matt was subtle at first, like the first rays of sunlight breaking through clouds. He found himself seeking out Ellie's company during breaks, his questions about her opinions on strategies and decisions growing more frequent. Ellie, in turn, began to see glimpses of the man beneath the title, the one who quoted poetry when he thought no one was listening and who kept a well-thumbed copy of Pride and Prejudice in his suitcase. One afternoon, as they worked late on a project, Ellie playfully tossed a paper airplane across the room, hitting Matt's desk. "Sorry," she said, trying to suppress her laughter. Matt looked up, surprised, then grinned, a genuine, unguarded smile that transformed his face. "You're terrible at this," he said, picking up the airplane and sending it soaring back toward her. It was a simple moment, but it marked a shift. The laughter that followed was not just Ellie's, it was Matt's too, a sound she had never heard before but recognized instantly as something precious. As the days passed, these moments of levity became more frequent. Matt would share a funny article he came across, or forward a light-hearted email from a colleague. Each time Ellie laughed, he felt a strange sense of fulfillment, as if a part of her he had never accessed before was now within reach. And in noticing her laughter, he began to see her in a new light, one that made it impossible to go back to the way things had been. The office dynamic shifted in ways both subtle and profound. Colleagues began to notice the change, a softening in Matt's demeanor, a brightness in Ellie's step. Rumors swirled, of course, but neither paid them much mind. For the first time in years, Matt felt a connection that had nothing to do with profit margins or strategic planning. It was a connection rooted in shared laughter, in moments of genuine joy that had been missing from his life for far too long. And as for Ellie, she found herself wondering how she had ever tolerated the old Matt, the one who rarely smiled, who kept everyone at arm's length. This new version of him, the one who laughed and engaged and truly saw her, was someone she wanted to know better. The distance between them had shrunk, both literally and emotionally, and neither seemed eager to put space back between them. The physical and emotional gap between Matt and Ellie continued to narrow in ways that neither could fully articulate. In the office, their desks had once been separated by a respectful distance, a boundary enforced by unwritten rules of professionalism. Now, Ellie found herself moving freely between his space and hers, her presence in his office becoming a natural extension of her role. The once rigid "thank you" and "please" transformed into casual, warm exchanges that carried an undercurrent of something deeper. During a late-night work session, Matt glanced up to find Ellie standing beside his desk, her hand resting lightly on the edge. "You've been staring at that spreadsheet for 20 minutes, she said softly. "Take a break." Without waiting for a response, she pulled a chair beside him and began massaging his shoulders, her touch both professional and undeniably intimate. Matt closed his eyes, the tension in his body melting away under her skilled fingers. "You're good at this," he murmured. Ellie smiled. "I've had practice with stressed bosses." The double meaning hung between them, unspoken but acknowledged. The emotional distance dissolved even more during moments outside the office. They began meeting for coffee or dinner, conversations flowing effortlessly from work to personal dreams and fears. Ellie discovered that Matt had a talent for photography, a hobby he'd kept hidden beneath his corporate persona. "I used to take pictures all the time," he said one evening as they walked through a park near his apartment. "I lost sight of it somewhere along the way." Ellie nudged him gently. "Maybe it's time to pick it back up." Matt looked at her, his eyes reflecting gratitude. Maybe. As the weeks turned into months, their relationship evolved in small but significant ways. Matt no longer hesitated to reach out to Ellie when he needed someone to talk to, about work, about his past, about the future. Ellie, in turn, found herself increasingly drawn to the man behind the title, the one who could be vulnerable and strong all at once. The line between professional partnership and personal connection blurred, and neither seemed inclined to redraw it. Colleagues began to notice the change too. Whispers filled the office about the forbidden office romance and the boss-employee love twist that seemed to be unfolding. But for Matt and Ellie, it wasn't about titles or office politics. It was about two people who had finally allowed themselves to see each other as they truly were. The distance that had once seemed so vast now felt like a memory, and the future held possibilities neither had dared to imagine just months before. The transformation in Matt and Ellie's relationship didn't go unnoticed. Whispers began to circulate through the office like wildfire. Colleagues exchanged knowing glances as they observed the subtle changes, a lingering touch on the arm during a conversation, a shared laugh that lasted a beat too long, the way Matt's eyes would follow Ellie across the room. The rumor mill was in full swing, and the favorite theory was that Ellie was the woman who had finally breached the walls of the cold boss's heart. "Have you heard?" Laura from accounting leaned in conspiratorially during a coffee break. "They say he's been seen leaving her apartment late at night." The team around her buzzed with speculation. Ellie, who had overheard the conversation, felt a mix of embarrassment and something else. Pride, validation. She wasn't sure. Meanwhile, Matt was growing increasingly aware of the gossip. He found himself scrutinizing his own behavior, wondering if he'd crossed some invisible line. One evening, as they worked late on a project, Ellie caught him staring. "What?" she asked, her tone light but her eyes searching his. Matt shook his head. "Nothing. It's just people are talking." Ellie set down her pen. "And? Does it matter?" Her question hung in the air, challenging him in a way no one else ever had. Matt hesitated, then leaned forward. "It might," he said quietly. "But maybe it's time we stopped caring so much about what they think." The admission was a turning point. They both knew the rumors were true, but acknowledging it felt like stepping into uncharted territory. Ellie had always been cautious, aware of the potential consequences of an office romance. But with Matt's rare vulnerability on display, her resolve began to waver. Was this worth the risk? The answer, when it came, was surprisingly clear. Yes. The weight of the rumors and the uncertainty of their evolving relationship began to take its toll. One evening, as they were reviewing documents in Matt's office, the tension between them was palpable. Matt suddenly stood up and walked over to the window, his back to Ellie. "We need to talk," he said, his voice uncharacteristically uncertain. Ellie set down her pen, her heart racing. "About what?" she asked, though she already had an idea. Matt turned to face her, his expression a mix of resolve and regret. "This thing between us," he said, gesturing between them. "It's complicating things. People are talking, and it's only going to get worse." Ellie stood up, her own uncertainty matching his. "Are you saying you want to stop this?" she asked, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside. Matt ran a hand through his hair. "I'm saying we need to think this through. Your career could be on the line, and mine too, though I'd never let that happen. But is it worth the risk?" The question hung in the air. Ellie felt a flicker of doubt. Was their connection strong enough to withstand the fallout? Matt seemed to be struggling with the same uncertainty. "Maybe we should take a step back," he suggested gently. "Just until things settle down." Ellie's heart ached at the suggestion, but she knew he was right, at least in part. The professional consequences were real, and neither of them could afford to be reckless. But as she looked at Matt, his vulnerability laid bare, she realized that walking away might be harder than either of them had anticipated. For Matt, the decision was as much about protecting Ellie as it was about shielding himself from the unfamiliar territory of emotional exposure. He had built his career on control and precision, and this new dynamic felt like a leap into the unknown. But as he watched Ellie's face, her expression a mix of hurt and determination, he wondered if pulling away was truly the solution, or if it was just another wall he was building to avoid getting hurt. The office air between them grew thick with unspoken words and unresolved feelings. Matt returned to his desk, his posture rigid. "We'll figure this out," he said finally, his tone more confident than he felt. Ellie nodded, though she wasn't sure she believed him. Both knew that the pull between them was powerful, and whether they stepped back or leaned in, their lives had already been irrevocably changed. The days that followed were filled with tension and uncertainty. Ellie found herself questioning everything: their relationship, her career, the future they might have together. The once comfortable dynamic between her and Matt had become strained, each interaction fraught with unspoken tension. She considered her options, the weight of the potential consequences pressing heavily on her mind. One evening, after another awkward exchange in the office, Ellie made a decision. She would resign. The thought terrified her, but she couldn't bear the stress of balancing her feelings for Matt with the professional boundaries that were now irrevocably blurred. She drafted her resignation letter, her hands trembling as she typed each word. Before she could submit it, Matt appeared at her desk. His presence was imposing, yet his eyes held a vulnerability she'd rarely seen. "Don't do it," he said, quietly, his voice carrying an urgency that caught her off guard. "Don't quit because of me." Ellie looked up, her eyes filling with tears. "What else am I supposed to do, Matt? The rumors, the tension? It's too much." Matt took a deep breath, his resolve hardening. "I won't lie. This isn't easy. But walking away isn't the answer either. I've spent my life building walls to protect myself, but with you, I don't want to hide anymore." His admission hung in the air, raw and unguarded. Ellie stared at him, her heart racing. "Are you saying what I think you're saying?" Matt nodded slowly. "I'm saying that I care about you, more than I've cared about anyone in years, and I'm willing to fight for us, even if it means facing the consequences." The words were like a lifeline. Ellie stood, closing the distance between them. "I don't want to quit either," she whispered. I need you to be sure." Matt's response was immediate. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." The moment stretched between them, charged with emotion and possibility. Without another word, Ellie deleted the resignation letter, and Matt took her hand in his, their fingers intertwining, a silent promise to face whatever came next together. The days that followed were filled with tension and uncertainty. Ellie found herself questioning everything: their relationship, her career, the future they might have together. The once comfortable dynamic between her and Matt had become strained, each interaction fraught with unspoken tension. She considered her options, the weight of the potential consequences pressing heavily on her mind. One evening, after another awkward exchange in the office, Ellie made a decision. She would resign. The thought terrified her, but she couldn't bear the stress of balancing her feelings for Matt with the professional boundaries that were now irrevocably blurred. She drafted her resignation letter, her hands trembling as she typed each word. Before she could submit it, Matt appeared at her desk. His presence was imposing, yet his eyes held a vulnerability she'd rarely seen. "Don't do it," he said, quietly, his voice carrying an urgency that caught her off guard. "Don't quit because of me." Ellie looked up, her eyes filling with tears. "What else am I supposed to do, Matt? The rumors, the tension. It's too much." Matt took a deep breath, his resolve hardening. "I won't lie. This isn't easy. But walking away isn't the answer either. I've spent my life building walls to protect myself. But with you, I don't want to hide anymore." His admission hung in the air, raw and unguarded. Ellie stared at him, her heart racing. "Are you saying what I think you're saying?" Matt nodded slowly. I'm saying that I care about you more than I've cared about anyone in years, and I'm willing to fight for us, even if it means facing the consequences. The words were like a lifeline. Ellie stood, closing the distance between them. I don't want to quit either, she whispered. I need you to be sure. Matt's response was immediate. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. The moment stretched between them, charged with emotion and possibility. Without another word, Ellie deleted the resignation letter, and Matt took her hand in his, their fingers intertwining. A silent promise to face whatever came next together. As we wrap up Matt and Ellie's journey from the confines of a professional relationship to a heartfelt partnership that transcends the office, we're left with a powerful message. Love, when genuine and courageously embraced, can transform not just two lives, but the very dynamics of a world built on rules and boundaries. Their story is a testament to the idea that sometimes the most unexpected places, like a corporate office, can become the breeding ground for the most profound connections. But this isn't just the end of their story. It's an invitation for you to reflect on your own journey. Have you ever experienced a connection that challenged the norms or boundaries you once thought unbreakable? What would it take for you to embrace vulnerability and courage in your own life? If you found yourself invested in Matt and Ellie's journey, if their story stirred something within you, then take a moment to engage with this content. Hit that like button. It's a simple gesture that supports creators and ensures stories like these continue to be told. Drop a comment below sharing what resonated most with you. Was it the tension of their forbidden romance, the vulnerability of their confessions, or the sweet triumph of their partnership? And if you have a different ending in mind, we'd love to hear it. Your perspective matters and adds to the richness of our community's conversations. Before you go, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. By doing so, you're not just following a channel. You're joining a community of individuals who value storytelling that touches the heart and challenges the mind. And while you're at it, give that notification bell a ring. This ensures you never miss out on new videos that explore the depths of human connection, the twists and turns of relationships, and the courage it takes to live authentically. So, until next time, keep your hearts open to the unexpected and your minds curious about the possibilities that lie just beyond the boundaries we so often accept as final. Thank you for being part of this journey with Matt and Ellie. Now, go out there and create your own stories worth telling.